This is a Sessions video tutorial using gradients.
In this tutorial, we'll take a look at how to use and modify gradients in Illustrator. Let's get started by applying a gradient to this square. To do this, I'll just click on the gradient swatch at the bottom of the toolbar. By default, Illustrator starts you off with this standard white and black gradient. I'll talk about how to change these colors in a moment. For now though, I want to point out that there are two types of gradients. What we're currently looking at is a linear gradient. The colors flow from one to the other in a straight line. By entering a different value in the angle field in the gradient panel, you can change the direction of that straight line. The other type of gradient is a radial gradient, which I can select from the Type drop-down menu. This gradient features color flowing out of a center point to the other color. You can change the look of this type of gradient by changing the value in the aspect ratio field. This option is new to Illustrator CS4. Okay, so let's look at how to change the colors in this gradient. There are several ways to do this. For CS4 users, double-click on the color box you want to change in the gradient panel and color options will appear. For those using an earlier version of Illustrator, you'll still double-click the color box, but instead of pop-up options, the color panel will open. As you can see, regardless of what version of Illustrator you're using, you have one color bar that shows black and white. To change this, open the Option menu and select RGB. For older versions of Illustrator, open the Options menu in the upper right of the color panel and select RGB. Now you've got three sliders to work with. Moving these around changes the color in the gradient. If you're not seeing any changes, make sure the shape is selected. CS4 users, you can also modify gradient colors by clicking the Swatches button in this pop-up panel. Another way to change colors in a gradient involves having the Gradient and Swatches panels open. It also helps to have a gradient filled shape selected. All I have to do now is just click and drag a color box from the Swatches panel and drop it on one of the color boxes in the Gradient panel. And to add a new color, just click below the color bar or drag a color from the Swatches panel to an empty area below the color bar. To remove a color, click and drag the box off the Gradient panel. So what else can you do? Well, you can slide the color boxes below the color bar to change the way the gradient looks. You can either just click and drag, or you can select a color box and enter a new position value in the location field. If you want a color box to be positioned in the exact center of the color bar, for example, just enter a value of 50 and press the Tab key on your keyboard. And CS4 users, you can instantly reverse the gradient by clicking the aptly named Reverse Gradient button on the panel. Just above the color bar are diamond-shaped icons. These are called midpoint markers. They show up at the midpoint of two color boxes. In the panel, I have four color boxes, so I've got three midpoint markers. You can click and drag these anywhere between two color boxes, or you can use the location field to more precisely position these. If it's getting a little tough to see all of these boxes and markers, expand the gradient panel by clicking and dragging the lower right corner. Now you can move boxes and markers more closely to further alter the gradient. Aside from using the gradient panel to modify a gradient, you can also use the gradient tool in the toolbar. If you're using CS4, you'll see controls appear on your shape that allow you to adjust the position of the gradient as well as its colors. These controls are called the Gradient Annotator. All I'm doing here is clicking and dragging over the shape to change the angle and smoothness of the gradient. If you find the controls somewhat annoying, turn them off by going to the View menu and then selecting Hide Gradient Annotator. What you're left with is what you'd see in previous versions of Illustrator. You can still click and drag over the shape to alter the angle and smoothness of the gradient, but the ability to modify the color positioning is no longer available. The last thing I'll touch on is how to use transparency in your gradients. If you're not using Illustrator CS4, you won't have this as an option. Okay, so rather than work with the same file, I'll switch over to another that already has artwork in it. I'm going to add some depth to this character using gradients. To start, I'll draw a circle where I want the first highlight to appear, and I'll fill this with a gradient. For this effect, I need the colors to flow from top to bottom, since my light source will come from above. And I'm replacing the standard black and white colors with yellow. With that done, I'll select one of the color boxes and enter a value of 0 in the opacity field. A quick adjustment to the amount of color versus opacity, and I've got my first highlight. Before moving on, I want to show you why I changed both of the standard gradient colors to yellow, even though one of them is completely transparent. I'll replace the transparent color box with black. And as you can see, some of that black shows up in the gradient, which is not what I want. So to make sure everything looks just right, I made both colors the same. Now I'll just make copies of the highlight shape and resize and position those. For the shading shapes, I'll just replace the gradient colors with a dark orange. And there you have it. Look at how to use and modify gradients in Illustrator.
Did you like this video? Then subscribe today to stay up to date on our channel or follow us on Google+, Twitter, and Facebook. Visit sessions.edu for more info on classes and admissions. Also, don't forget to check out the links to free downloadable content in the description. Thanks for watching.